Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello, I'm Jeffrey Mishlove, and today I'd like to talk about working with psychics and intuitives. As the former president of the Intuition Network and as a parapsychologist throughout my adult career, I've had the opportunity to know and work with many people who are psychics and intuitives, both professionally and, I guess you'd have to say, amateurs or just gifted people who don't profess to be psychic or intuitive. And I can say this, my friend Gary Zukav once put it, I think, very eloquently. Gary wrote a wonderful book called The Seat of the Soul and many subsequent books along those lines. And I recall on one occasion asking him about working with psychics in the practical arena. And he said, well, when you attempt to use psychic abilities for practical purposes, the result you get is going to depend on your karma, which is a pretty ambiguous statement. It's hard to pin it down. But let me give you some examples of, I think, how that has worked out, at least in my life. On the worst end, I recall many years ago a fellow who thought he was highly intuitive, highly psychic, who insisted that I had syphilis, and he could tell. And of course, that was, over 30 years ago, and I think the facts at this point have borne out that I am not syphilitic and have never been. But that's an example of an individual who was offered uninvited advice, and the advice was wrong. Now, the irony is several other people have offered me uninvited advice, and it turned out to be spot on. I have to say this, I've never done well with psychic readings. I've had any number of psychic readings from people who are well-known and highly respected. None of them have been particularly accurate for me. But let me give you an example of a psychic reading well-known to me, and it's actually published, that had a dramatic effect. Tina Turner, the pop star, in her autobiography, I, Tina, talked about working with a Hollywood psychic, actually a good friend of mine named Carol Ann Dreyer. And Carol Ann gave her a past life reading in which she told Tina, who at the time was a battered housewife doing small gigs in Las Vegas and accumulating a massive personal debt. And she told Tina, you were Queen of Egypt in a past lifetime. You were the female pharaoh Hatshepsut. And Tina took that in, and somehow the idea, the concept, the thought that she may have been a pharaoh of ancient Egypt enabled Tina Turner to get in touch with her power, and she rose to become one of the most prominent people in the pop music scene ever as a result of that reading, and she credits Carol Ann Dreyer for it in her autobiography. Now, we don't know whether Tina Turner really was a incarnation of a famous female pharaoh, but the myth, the story, the idea, it had such power for her. It energized her. It dramatically changed her life. And that is an example of what psychics are capable of doing. I'll give you another example. In my case, Carol Ann Dreyer, the same lady, had a cable TV show in Los Angeles, and back in about 1985, early 1986, as I recall, she invited me to fly to Los Angeles and be a guest on her TV show at her expense. And she interviewed me about parapsychology. It was a very nice interview. And then she said to me, Jeffrey, I brought you here for a reason. I want you to watch very carefully exactly what we're doing here, how the studio is set up, how I interview you, how this is all working out, because I want you to go back up to Northern California where you are living and you start a TV show like this, and I promise you it's going to be successful beyond your wildest imagination. Now, I was pretty down at that point in my life. I had been fighting a libel suit for 6 years and felt that I had lost the esteem and respect of my colleagues. But I followed her advice, and I had no background in TV. I'd been doing some radio programs up until that point, but I launched a little cable TV show, just as she had recommended, with my good friend Arthur Bloch, who incidentally is the author of the Murphy's Law series of books. And within about 10 weeks, the cable TV station said, okay, that's you've done as much as you can do. So we took a tape over to the local PBS station, KCSM, in San Mateo, California, and they liked it, and they said, we'll give you a regular evening slot on our station. Another year passed, and they said, we'd like to sponsor you for satellite uplink to public television stations throughout North America. And before long, we were being carried on 100 stations. The original Thinking Aloud program went way beyond my wildest imagination of what might have been possible. And I credit Carol Ann Dreyer for reaching out to me in that way. Another occasion happened when a member of our Intuition Network called me up and she said, Jeffrey, I have information for you. I know that you're involved in a business negotiation. Well, I was. And she said, I want you to know that you can do much better than you think you can. You really have the advantage here. Well, that also turned out to be true. So those are a couple of examples of the ways in which you can open yourself up to such possibilities, and they can be dramatically helpful for you. The irony in my case is, every time I've attempted to have a formal psychic reading, the results have been disappointing. But I know it varies person by person, time by time, place by place. And I think that's what Gary Zukav meant when he said, when you get a psychic reading, the result for you is going to be dependent upon your own karma. Well, what I'd like to leave you with is this thought. Think about Tina Turner and her image that she might have been the Pharaoh of Egypt. In fact, she wrote a song really about it called I Might Have Been Queen, on one of her albums, Private Dancer, as I recall. Think about what would it take, what myth might activate your inner power, some latent, it could be anything. I mean, it doesn't have to be a big career goal. It could be a personal goal, that somewhere within you, waiting to be unlocked, is a myth, a key, a story that could activate your own personal potential. It's worth thinking about, and I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you for being with me.